Okay, cool. I'll just start, and then hopefully everyone else comes. So the first thing we're going to talk about, so we're doing like case construction, and how to basically apply what we've done the last few days to actually like writing cases. If anyone missed any of the days, that's okay. Maybe try to get notes from someone if you're interested. And we're also gonna, at the end, I'm gonna take a list of everyone's emails. So then we're gonna make, Julian and I are like making a Dropbox currently that has resources for ideal theory good arguments, and then some of these introduction to more like continental philosophy. So for example, like intro to Deleuze type articles. So we're gonna construct this resource Dropbox, and you should all, but like we'll share it with you probably like today or tomorrow, later day or tomorrow. It's still being made, so yeah, cool. So first, when you're writing an analytical, like philosophical app, what is one of the first things you should probably be thinking about in terms of if you know that you're gonna like have a bunch of rounds on the topic that involve critiques, which you will, because everyone will. What's like one thing? What are some things to think about? Where's the? This is a weird eraser.
Like, what should we have in our case?
Basically just like concerns that you might have, like going into the process, and like things you think you might want to include.
Preamps.
Yeah, so generally I guess preamps is good. We should, and we'll unpack that in a second. I'm just gonna move this video. So preamps, what else?
Scrap triggers.
On app?
Always.
You can use scrap triggers on the app.
Yeah.
But
Step definitely negates.
no, it doesn't.
Will that make it affirm?
There's no way to have buffers.
Condo logic. But I think that would be, but I think if scrap triggers presumption, then scrap could totally affirm.
Yeah, well,
So, next. Okay, so what else do you think we need to have? Think about specific types of arguments you want to have.
preclusion?
Sure. Yeah.
An underview of this piece of land.
I mean, you don't want just like a case bad underview. You just want, but I think that the underview would just include preempts and preclusive arguments. What else? Alright, I'm just gonna go, what?
Problem.
Yeah, we can find that in the word.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm gonna, so those are all good things to think about. So now to sort of go into more detail on all those things. So first, one thing that you should always try to have in one of these analytic type apps is, wait, I need to fix this video. It's not really on. Okay. So is that anyone's phone? Okay. Concrete offense that appeals to rhetoric about like oppression or about like like helping material conditions in order to prove that the framework isn't always abstract. I think that's really important. Because I think no matter what you're reading, you should still be able to apply it to the real world, right? I'm not saying that you should read like a Deleuze app with like a util, like just like util offense, right? That doesn't work because they're different frameworks. But something that you can do is, for example, if your framework is vague, trying to make it like appeal to specific instances can also clarify it in the judge's mind. So not only does it give you a leg up on the like framework debate or like, on the contention debate, but it also gives you a leg up on the framework debate. If someone says you're being abstract, explain, then how am I using my framework to literally like be applied to situations of real world oppression and explaining why we should solve them. If my framework were abstract, or if my framework, even if my framework is abstract, that's only bad if that like distracts us from material harms, right? That's the impact to abstraction bad, that it distracts us. And if it doesn't actually distract us, right, if we still talk about material harms, they lose a lot of their like upper hand in terms of like the perceptual debate, especially, right? If they say things like, the app is trying to save lives, or the app is trying to help people. Or, sorry, if you were able to say that, versus them being able to say, you know, the NC is the only thing that cares about concrete harms, like racism, right? So, like, for example, one thing that I tried to do was I read, like, a lot of Butler apps when in the fall, and they were often had, like, really longish abstract frameworks that just talked about, like general, like, grievability, recognition, the other, right? They sounded vague, but then my offense was always very concrete. So on the nuclear power topic, the offense was about how people who live near nuclear power plants are not recognized as grievable by the government and the industry because there are no laws that protect them, really. Or there are laws, but they're not, the government hasn't taken a firm enough stance to protect them. So the only way they can actually recognize them and, like, the health effects and the pollution effects is just ban nuclear power and, like, condemn the industry that's doing this. So in that case, it is a concrete impact of material violence, and usually it was against, like, people, like, more marginalized communities lived around the power plants. So things like that also help you. So they help you in a couple ways. They help you, I guess we said, perceptually. They help you. You don't distract from the issue. They help you weigh offense. And they also help you with the permutation debate. And so the permutation debate, we talked about methodological terms yesterday, how you can explain how you're using the method of, like, the framework and the contention sort of combined, in that you're, like, doing your advocacy to achieve a certain end of, like, fulfilling the framework, right? So that's, like, your total method. But these kinds of things can maybe also help you blitz out a couple of, like, post-fiat type terms. Terms where you're, like, do the app in order to, like, help the people who are currently dying from the environmental effects from nuclear power, and then, like, disrupt the, like, disrupt capitalist society. Like, they won't be able to take part in the revolution unless we first, like, harm, like, specifically target this capitalist industry that's, like, hurting them and preventing them from, like, being revolutionary or something like that. Things like that help you a lot because you can make multiple terms really easily. You can explain why the app method is good, so why recognizing people as grievable is, like, an epistemological prerequisite or something to doing the K-out. You can also explain why maybe just, like, doing your post-fiat advocacy is also good under the critique framing, which is helpful. Okay, the next thing that's good to have is impact calculus. This is in no particular order. This is the order that Jillian and I thought of them. Impact calc is something I can't stress enough. So basically, the impact calculus is where you get the chance to explain how your, like, abstract, or not abstract necessarily, how your dense philosophical position can actually be applied and, like, filter impacts through it. So, for example, how you weigh offense is one thing you should have in it. And when I say how you weigh offense, it's more important, honestly, to exclude as much neg offense as possible. Does that make sense?
I had a question.
Yeah, I'm just making sure that this didn't. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
I've got this theory shell around me that's like, you don't tell me how to weigh offense, but, like, what is sufficient, like, to put in that case?
Okay, to be honest, there rules out spec shells that are, like, 9 planks long, right? That explain, like, literally everything you have to do. It's like there's, like, one shell that people often read that has, like, talks about how you need to talk about how to weigh offense, how you need to explain how every argument interacts with theory. You need to do a lot of stuff where basically if you did, you'd just be, like, handing on your strategy, right? Things like that are just things you have to be prepped against, right? Like weighing, or arguments about how all the planks aren't, like, necessarily, like, key, like, how, like, they're arbitrary planks. For example, if there's, like, not a specific offense story about the combination of all 7, that could be a reason why the theory shell isn't good. We might go more into answer. Like, this isn't a theory lecture, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But, like, just because there's a theory shell that says you should weigh, like, for, like, 3 minutes of the AF doesn't mean that you actually have to. You know what I mean? I think it's good to just, as, like, a safety mechanism, basically just have an argument. Like, as long as you have an argument, honestly, about how, like an impact calculus type thing, you can always just point to that and say, I have an impact calculus. You can ask me more questions about it. Or it's, like, does everything you need to do. It's not my fault you just, like, didn't understand that the impact calculus tells us to weigh offense.
I think my question was just, like, what is it? Like, how do I weigh offense?
Oh, so yeah, that's what I'm, like, about to do.
Okay.
So, the impact calculus says, like, so weigh offense, exclude as much offense as possible. So this should include something about how consequences don't matter. Because under these frameworks, they probably won't. Actually, no, they just won't. And if they do a little bit, the kinds of consequences you care about are so different from mutual consequentialism. You should still have that rhetoric in the card to exclude, like, turns, right? For example, like backlash turns, or turns about how, like, the nuclear power, like, for example, I keep on using the Butler framework as the example because I think it's, like, pretty straightforward, and then we just have to, like, recognize people as worth grieving, right? Does everyone remember that framework? Cool. So, for example, if people had a bunch of turns, it was like, if we ban nuclear power, the economy is going to collapse, or something, or the economy is going to, like, downturn, and people lose jobs, and then more people will be poor, and poor people aren't recognized as grievable as often, so that turns case. Right? You won't be able to exclude arguments like that. The reason why that would not turn the case is actually, does anyone know why that wouldn't turn the case?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Yeah. So if the F talks about how we need to ban nuclear power, for the government to proactively recognize the people who live around the nuclear power plants and who are, like, at an increased risk of cancer, like, various environmental harms, etc. If you explain how the government needs to recognize them as grievable and not, like, disposable, because there are a lot of cards in the app like that that are disposable, the government has to recognize them as not disposable by condemning the industry that has rendered them disposable. So the government needs to, like, proactively recognize them as grievable, through policy, in order to, like, fulfill the app framework. So then the turn, if the turn was, but if the government bans nuclear power, it'll lead to an economic downturn, and more people will be poor, and generally, people who are poor are viewed as less grievable. So there's gonna be less grievability in an AF world. That's the turn.
Grievability is good?
Yeah, grievability is good under Butler. Do you give it a shot? Why might not that turn make sense?
Well, you're saying that the government needs to recognize those people as grievable, but just poor people, they don't specify, like, who's recognizing the poor people as grievable, so we just assume the world in general, but yours is specific to the government.
Yeah, so that's definitely one argument. So that's the, like, key argument to make. So the argument is arguments about how it's, like, looks at, like, orientations, for example. Like, we care about how the actor in question in the resolution, like countries, right, orient themselves towards people. So they orient themselves in a good way if they ban nuclear power, right? Even if that makes more people poor, that's not offense under the framework, because the argument here is, like, grievability can't be aggregated, right? So orientations, and then, like orientations versus aggregation, I think is a good way to phrase it. You can have reasons why aggregation fails. And these are honestly usually not that fleshed out in an AF framework, which is like not horrible. You can make this argument extremely quickly in an AF framework, reasons why aggregation fails. If you read any either an analytic or a continental philosophical position, right? Because this can have arguments about how aggregation, like, you can't have 5 provabilities. Or for example, under Kant, right? Kant would not say, oh, you have to recognize 6 people as ends themselves, over recognizing 7 people as ends themselves. It's like, no, 6 over 5, for example. You don't just weigh how many times you see people are ends themselves. Or you don't say, oh, today I broke 5 universalizable maxims, but you broke 6, so I'm more moral than you. Right? It's like, no, you're both just immoral. Stop breaking universalizable maxims. So things like that. Just explain in some, like, silly terms honestly like make fun of the idea that you could possibly aggregate under your framework. Another argument that you should probably have is, so consequences don't matter, aggregation fails. That's really important because people often try to go for consequentialist recontextualizations. So that's like basically they try to say consequences do matter under the framework, and then just read a bunch of consequentialist terms because it's easier than dealing with like the specific offense in the app, especially when the framework is like written to be really narrow. So that leaves us with like, we need to explain why aggregation fails and have those preempts, and hopefully they drop them. Also, extinction doesn't come first. This is not something you have to read every round because, for example, you know you're hitting a debater who's going to read a K, right? But it doesn't hurt to have a short argument because also debaters are versatile. You don't know if they are going to read a disad, right? It's an extinction scenario. Another argument that you should have with more analytic type philosophies is an argument about how we need to, like, how this creates a picture. So the more specific K preempts now. So the idea of like the ideal theory good arguments are sometimes good to have in the impact calculus. So reasons why the app is a key method to having a liberatory strategy. So these arguments can be specific or general. There are a couple specific examples I have for ideal theory good within these frameworks, because obviously the entire first day of this track was like a laundry list of ideal theory good. So any of those arguments can be as weighting arguments anywhere in the framework or in the impact calculus, but typically it makes more sense in the impact calculus to have maybe specific ideal theory good arguments related to the framework, because it explains why the app is a key method and why like the app offense might be able to be weighed against a critique, which is why it's like an impact calculus, right? The impact of the app offense can be weighed against the critique. So some specific ones would be like the FAR argument and epistemic humility. I'll explain this in a second. So first, the FAR argument is a, so actually does anyone know who FAR is? Okay, don't worry, we'll put the article in the Dropbox right at the end, but basically what FAR says is that it's basically a Kant versus the critique argument. She explains why Kantianism is like a key anti-racist strategy, basically. And you can like look at these articles more in depth. We don't have time to go over like every specific argument, but basically why it's really important to think of people, why treating people as ends themselves is like a great method, and following like these universalizable maxims in a world where people did that would prevent oppression. And you don't want to just make the argument like in a world where everyone followed universalizable maxims, no one would be racist, right? Because that's true, but that bites into the same problem that people are criticizing with ideal theory, which is basically you can't just say in a world where everyone did X. But instead, the argument might be cultivating Kantian behavior, right? Like reading the framework. And in and of itself is like an educational practice that helps like affirm these good strategies for fighting oppression. Does that make sense? Like having like, so Julie actually brought up this example 2 days ago, which is the Fichte example. So how Fichte is a Kantian who basically, this guy was like a huge anti-Semite, right? Really not good, hated Jews, and he basically, once he started reading Kantian philosophy and got super into it, he completely changed his ways, and he like ultimately, like during the rise of like Nazism in Germany, he like condemned it, right? He like was able to like reform himself because of his exposure to Kantian philosophy. He was able to like realize, oh shoot, I'm not being a good Kantian. So even if he were like, for example, Kant himself, he was not a good Kantian because he was like racist and sexist, right, and ableist. He was a lot of things, right? He was a white man in the 1800s or 1700s, so he was not necessarily someone with views that we would consider like good today at all. However, he was being a bad Kantian. That's the argument that you would make there, right? So this also preempts that. Like, so when the FAR argument is good to like weigh against K's that are saying things like, oh, Kant is racist, Kant is sexist. Like, yes, but his philosophy is the best strategy we have to actually achieving liberation. The next argument is epistemic humility. Does anyone know, has anyone heard that term before? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're writing a virtue ethics, NC.
I read that problem.
Yeah. So, epistemic humility is basically the idea that we don't create, so this could go along with the virtue ethics app. That's just why I wanted to have a range of examples. So virtue ethics basically says we need to like lead the good life, right, and pursue it and follow our natural forms. And then like we have to try to achieve human flourishing. It's based on like Aristotle. So it says we need to follow certain virtues. So virtue ethics agrees that we should have, and this isn't going to be like an intro to virtue ethics lecture, there's like a ton more that I'm like glossing over here, but just so you understand the example, virtue ethics says that we need to like, instead of necessarily saying, oh, how do we avoid moral skepticism, and building a philosophy bottom up about avoiding moral skepticism. So for example, Kantianism does that, right? It says we need to have binding obligations, and the only inescapable thing is things derived from a priori reason. That's what Kant says. Like we need to derive these obligations within ourselves because then they're binding, rather than external. Another argument might be like utilitarianism, for example, attempts to avoid skepticism by saying, by like the phenomenal introspection argument, the Sinababu card, it says like the only thing we know is pain and pleasure. So those are like things we objectively know, and that would escape skepticism because that would say we can't know things like morality or something. But it's like, sure, but we know pain and pleasure, so we can, if we derive morality based on that, then we can know that as well, right? Those are bottom-up philosophies, whereas something like virtue ethics might be like a top-down philosophy more, where you look at what a good person is, and you attempt to mirror that behavior. You attempt to cultivate human flourishing and like virtuous behavior, right? So you sort of just pick virtues and you justify why those are key to having virtuous behavior, and then you just attempt to follow them, right? So things like mercy or like giving, charity, things like having like self-care, all of these things are virtues, but they're not necessarily justified in the same way. Yeah.
Like all parts of virtue ethics, do they have like an ideal subject, like what the human form should be?
Yeah, usually, yeah. Because it still talks about, so it doesn't have like what the human form should be, right? It doesn't say like, oh, the human form should like look like this, for example, or think like this. It's more just like we need to like flourish as people, and the human form would be something that's like Aristotle's like a naturalist, so it's basically like he talks a lot about the form and like consistency with like their function, or just like to flourish and like so things like that. It's like so with the epistemic humility argument. The epistemic humility argument says like basically virtue ethics allows for like readjusting. It's epistemically humble because you can like look at different virtues, right, and just like look at what it means to be a good person, and allows room for like deciding between virtues, right? It doesn't say, oh, this is the only objective way to avoid skepticism, right? It allows for like epistemological disagreement. Like we don't necessarily know where these obligations stem from, right, or like how we got reason, but we don't really care, right? We just want to be good people. So that epistemic humility argument is leveraged against the K by saying things like, oh, I'm the only one who doesn't take this like dogmatic stance on the source of morality, or things like that, right? It's key to actually having options for other liberatory strategies, is the argument. Like, I'm painting a picture of the good life, but I'm not necessarily taking firm stances. I allow for, like, discussion, for example. That argument, it's a Woods and Roberts card. I'll try to find the edit and put it in the Dropbox, but I'm not sure if I will be able to. Actually, I definitely will be able to. Woods and Roberts. And if I can't find the full text article, I can put in, like, online cards. But, yeah, those are sort of various weighing arguments. So the next thing you should have is like a picture of how to solve oppression and why it's bad under your framework. Like what oppression looks like and why it's bad under your framework. Because that is a key ideal theory good argument, right? We spent a huge amount of time talking 2 days ago about why one of the most important weighing arguments for why something like Kantianism would be like leveraged against a critique would be something like you can know what gravity is. Do you remember Jillian's example? That's like you can know what gravity is and you can know it exists, but that's not enough to land a space probe on the moon. In the same way, like, you can know oppression exists for sure, right? But without being able to clearly define it and explain how to best solve it, we're left without a proper liberatory strategy. So another example of that might be like when Jillian said, you need to be able to have a definition of racism, of oppression, that might exclude something like reverse racism, right? Other times when you attempt to define oppression, without a concrete normative ethical theory that prescribes obligations, sometimes it can be difficult. Because you can say things like, oh, oppression is like the systematic exclusion of one group, for example, right? Or oppression is treating people differently based on various like characteristics about them that they can't change, right? Things like that. It might be hard to explain why reverse racism doesn't count. However, we intuitively agree that reverse racism is probably not a thing, right? It's probably not, it doesn't count as oppression. It's very different from actual like racism. So that's why it's called reverse racism. So something like that. If a Kantian might explain, well, people aren't being used as a means for one race to like achieve more, right? Something like that. Or it's not a system of equal freedom. It could be a hindrance, like you could frame that as hindering a hindrance, right? If you're speaking of, if someone is like, say, discriminating against a white person, you could say, oh, that was hindering a hindrance. It was perhaps doing a small violation of freedom in order to compensate for another violation of freedom or prevent another violation of freedom. So, for example, like decreasing in a small, like by a small percentage, the chance of one individual white person maybe getting into a college, but overall, like the hindrance of freedom that would be like denying access or not having affirmative action might be greater. So something like that, where if you can explain it in terms of your framework, that's really useful, especially in CX and late speeches. Especially, and so explain in terms of your framework. And then also like good for CX and overviews in 2N, 2A. Okay. Because you should be able to, also, yeah, so the other thing is pre-written overviews. That counts in the front lines when we said before, but that's really important. A lot of very strong critique debaters are super good at writing great overviews to start their speeches. And there is no reason why people reading ideal theory frameworks, right, and going for ideal theory good, can't have just as compelling overviews. Explaining, like, overview, I'm the only one creating a clear picture of like, how to solve oppression. We can say all we want that we need to stop it without a clear instruction manual or something that would be able to exclude like competing definitions of oppression. We can't solve it. Or any one of the ideal theory good arguments, making that an overview could be really helpful. For example, overview, I'm the only one who prescribes normative obligations, which is the only way to bind the oppressor into following my theory, right? Things like that, where if you make the argument, the ideal theory good argument, and then have a cool example, that can be really useful. So pre-written overviews, and conceptually they're so nice because it's you start off your later speeches with like right out of the gate. You're going fast, you sound compelling, you can be loud. It sounds much better than if you're trying to think of the overview on the spot. Because like otherwise then you can't focus all your energy on being persuasive. You just think about like how to actually make the argument. Yeah. And then let's see. Okay, yeah. And then when you know you're hitting, last thing for analytic frameworks that's like a strategic thing that's important, is when you know you're hitting a K debater. You know for sure. Take this with like a big, like, if you know for sure, because a lot of times, if someone reads like a ton of K preempts to one debater, right, and they'll spend like 2 minutes of the app explaining why it comes before the critique, and then the debater just gets up and reads T and Kant, right, or gets up and reads T and like maybe T and the K, but then you don't have any T preempts, so you're already sort of behind on that debate. Things like that. You want to make sure that it's actually, like, if you know you're hitting a debater who the entire season has read one-off case, for example, has been the same case, or things like that. There's some things you should especially think about. Shorten the actual framework if you know they won't engage with it. So you should have multiple versions of your asks against different debaters, right? So if you know creating a framework debater, having a longer framework with fewer K preamps, and then having a standard version of a good mix of the two, and then having a version where it's a shorter framework. Like, for example, you spend less time explaining why a posteriori reason fails, for example, if you're reading your contact. You spend less time explaining why, like, how exactly it would be to will a universalizable maxim. Things like that, where you know they won't contest it, these like little internal links to the justifications should be shortened. The next thing you should do is read a bunch of preempts, which is basically all we've been talking about. Obviously, read your ideal theory good arguments. And read the framework-specific arguments. So you should be doing research, and because there are more arguments than the arguments that we've gone over, right? There should be probably authors who describe why your framework author, like whatever your favorite framework is a good liberatory strategy, or good for like helping us become educated. Which brings me to my next point, which is throw in an argument about education. So this does not mean you need a roll of the ballot in the app. And honestly, a lot of times it doesn't make sense because it's not like talking about the debate space. However, if you have an argument about why it's like pedagogically key, right? Or for example, agonism. So I read a radical democracy, like agonism app in January, which talked about it was like a Moof Derrida type situation. So something like that. There was an argument about how agonism is key in educational spaces because like we're not going to learn anything if we're not like open to contestation of viewpoints, things like that. So in that argument, it was actually a contention argument that explained why, like, on the free speech topic, we need to, like, have open debate on college campuses. But it could also be leveraged against a critique, because it's also a reason why the framework comes before the K. Another thing you could have is just, like, honestly, if you Google, like, your author and education, you get a lot of cool stuff. Like, interviews sometimes with your author who explains, like, why it's important to learn about their philosophy. Things like that can be really helpful. And then lastly, a couple other things that you should be trying to include in your. I realized that I want to go over Derrida really quickly because we didn't get to that yesterday. So I'm just going to quickly explain the last things that you should have in your continental app specifically. So continental philosophy, for example, if you read a Deleuze app, a Foucault app, if you read like any sort of high, like what people have been calling high theory app, right? If you read something like that, then it's good to have these things. Let's see. Actually, first, any questions? You good? Cool. That should be good. So, checklist for continental apps. An ontological claim, which honestly, if that's not in your continental philosophy framework, that probably means that like it's not actually a framework yet, right? Because basically every single continental philosopher is very focused on identity. That's what you're talking about. They're focused on how identities interact. Yesterday we talked forever about how Deleuze thinks, for example, that we are constantly becoming, right? We need to embrace that becoming. We need to channel our affect and allow us to become other things, right? That sort of fluid identity. That's an ontological claim. Ontology, by the way, is like the study of being, right? An ontological claim would be about the nature of the subject. When I say subject, also everyone knows what I mean, right? I think we said it a bunch of times in this track, but making sure.
I think we may have talked about this because I have like strategic applications of continental philosophy and like ontology claims and methodological.
Yeah. That's like strategic applications of why continental philosophy comes before the K, like in terms of how to leverage it. This is what you should include in your framework.
Okay.
Yeah. The next argument is picture the subject, which is part of the ontological claim. But the ontological claim should explain like ontology key to knowing ethics, which is basically just like that argument is important because otherwise you don't necessarily access like an ethical plane, right? If you just spend like a long time talking about people, right, and like this is what people are like, maybe the NC would get up, read their Kant NC, and be like, yeah, sure, you read your Deleuze app that describe what people are like. Problem is you don't have any ethical or normative claims saying why we care. So sure, people are like that, but we need to pretend like they're not in order to actually have ethics, which is my Kantian philosophy, right? So you can just say ontology key to ethics. Next one is picture of the subject, which is like explaining your ontology. Why it's good. And why that means we have certain normative obligations, right? So like a syllogism is usually where the syllogism stems from, about normative obligations. And I'm really generalizing this because we want this to be applicable to like any high theory philosophy you write. The next one you have is weighing, embedded. And this should be to identity, case about empirical structures. So for example, a cap K or an imperialism K or something, right? That's about these institutions that are considered oppressive. And those high theory always interacts really nicely with it, because it actually, continental philosophy cares a lot about things like capitalism. Deleuze hates capitalism, right? Explains why the capitalist system is forcing us into states of being and not allowing people to become, right? Forcing people to these rigid social positions in a hierarchy. So if you can explain how your method is key to actually stopping things like capitalism or imperialism, that's important. Another thing you should have is educational claims. So obviously this isn't like a full list of like everything that you need to justify your framework, because it's dependent on the actual philosophy itself, right? Every philosophy has a different syllogism. But you should have a claim about how here's a good pedagogical strategy, which is what we were talking about before with the analytic stuff. Cool. So now we have enough time to talk about Derrida really quick. So we're going to Derrida and then like sort of Moof, who cares about radical democracy, which is like based on Derrida. And this interacts in really interesting ways with the K. First, is there any other like requests for things that we talked about in the last 15 minutes besides Derrida? No. Cool. Okay. So Derrida / radical democracy. Radical democracy just like is an offshoot of Derrida. So does anyone know anything about what Derrida says? Have they heard anything, any buzzwords about Derrida? Or is it all brand new? What did you say? Deconstruction. Alright. Agonism is the same thing as radical democracy. So yeah, the like first half of an agonism framework justifies like a Derridan conception of the subject. I don't know if Derridan is actually a word, by the way. Derrida's conception of the subject. So one thing is basically the first argument is a strong one and sort of a scary sounding one. Violence is inevitable. Yeah. Fun fact, the Hobbes-Derrida interactions are really interesting because they basically come to very different conclusions based on the same idea. They both do agree that violence is inevitable. However, violence is not defined in Derridan theories. I'm going to keep saying the word Derridan, whether or not it exists. Derridan theories about how... So violence is not defined like punching people is inevitable, right? Or like murder is inevitable, right? Instead, violence is just like disagreement. This is a really important thing to know if you ever debate against an agonism or Derrida type framework, because a lot of people will answer the framework and be like, you say violence. You say we need to organize violence, but we don't know what violence is without some other framework, like my framework, right? That's a really common response to this type of framework. But the thing is, there's no conception of violence as like bad action, right? Violence is not bad action in this case. It's not like, oh, violence is defined as not treating people as ends in themselves, or violence is defined as things that cause pain and not pleasure, right? Instead, other frameworks might use the word violence as just a shortcut for saying violation of my framework, right? That is not what this says. Violence is just disagreement between people, which always happens, right?
So we're the most violent people involved.
Debaters? Yes.
So I'm pretty sure you'll get to this, but so I'm gonna ask like the more specific questions. I was just gonna ask like, why is violence bad then? But if like disagreement is inevitable, then like, why do we talk about it?
It's ununique.
Okay, so like you could say it's not unique. However, this does not attempt to stop it.
Okay.
The argument here is we're always going to have epistemic violence, right? The violence between people, disagreements, clashes. It's always going to exist. However, so that's like one part of it. That's also just like what Derrida like agrees with. It's just like people fight with each other, and our subjects within that system are not. We don't necessarily have to clearly define them, right? Instead, we just know it's about political philosophy. That's another key thing. Or just like ethics must be politics. The idea here is like politics is like the interaction between people also, right? Like these like how these like organize these disagreements like manifest themselves and organize themselves, right? So this is talking about how when we make ethics, we do not care what the individual person thinks or feels. We care about political philosophy, where we just figure out how to best structure things, right? Like move around these chalk pieces. I don't have markers today. I really like that metaphor of like using markers to describe the subjects. But imagine I have a bunch of expo markers, right? It's about like we don't really care what the expo marker like is exactly like. We care about organizing them and moving them around and putting them in a productive situation where they can achieve common goals. So violence is inevitable. People are going to disagree. But then the issue with that is attempting to stop violence is violent. So what that says, Amy and Garrett did not come, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a question now.
Yes.
And again, this is just talking about disagreement, right? Or like, is violent in a
Disagreement. Just think about it. It's like a vocab term. Imagine it. If we have to say like schmilence, between disagreements, like whatever. It's just like it's not violence like punching people. So it's more, but it's like asserting your idea over someone else, for example, or forcing someone to like asserting ideas or fighting with people, right? So asserting, trying to stop violence, right? Trying to say like, okay, no, we're all the same. We all agree with each other. We have to be Kantian now, right? Follow these universalizable maxims. That's violent too, because it's forcing people into one perspective, right? And stopping them from like having individual thoughts and opinions.
This is something like a really good thing for this topic.
Yeah, so
Well, like if I attempt to stop like real violence, like punching, I don't like if say
yeah, so I can explain why punching is bad under Derrida's framework as well. But basically, attempting to stop violence is violent. It's self-defeating, right? So basically, normal ethical theories, yeah. Why is violence just attempt to stop violence?
Imagine like guys like stop fighting, cut it out. Like,
No, because it's not fight. Violence is not fighting in Derrida. Violence is just disagreement. So attempting to stop this inevitable disagreement and clashing perspectives
oh, okay.
I'm saying violence because that's like what they call, like what a framework calls it, so like in order to understand it. But
So don't try to stop violence.
don't try to stop disagreement. We have to channel it in productive ways, which I'll explain. So normal ethical theories fail, basically. So this takes out universal rules really nicely. Telling me stop violence is violent. Normal ethical theories fail. So then, that means we need to organize the violence and channel it. Make it productive. Again, remember, Derrida just cares about political strategies, not like ontological claims, which is why it's okay to say, okay, the nature, the purpose of a political strategy is to try to like achieve goals, right? Like, so people can like take collective action, like organize themselves into society, things like that. So there's sort of assumptions that underlie it, but they're justified by just saying like we care about politics. We don't care about ontology. So in that case, why do you like channel it and make it productive? Maybe you'd say, oh, but why do you make things productive? It's like because it's political strategy is the answer. So to organize it, channel it, make it productive. So the way we do that is the way I'm going to just best explain just through radical democracy. It's the way it's read most often in debate. So it's basically by embracing radical democracy or agonism. And what you do there is, for example, say this is the system, right? This is like the world. And here are all the people. And they all fight with each other, right? And so they're all fighting with each other in this system. The idea is you need to allow this space to exist. That's the key thing. You can't have someone, for example, who comes in and tries to kill everyone. Because then we don't have disagreement anymore, right? We don't have a system where we can allow to channel our disagreement to productive spaces. Yeah.
But that's a good thing, because then we're all like, no, don't kill us. And the killer's like, I want to kill you guys. I'm like, no, don't kill us because of like.
I don't think that's normally how it works. I'll be honest. I think that if someone came into the agonistic space and wanted to kill everyone, someone trying to convince them with their words would not help.
Okay.
So I think the point of Derrida, the point that's the good thing about disagreement, is it's good to be able to disagree with each other, in that we are open to changing our minds, right? We have a space where we can like convince each other of viewpoints and listen to viewpoints, right? And maybe we'll never agree, but that's fine, because at least we're being forced to justify our beliefs to each other, and we're allowing the other person to speak, right?
Can this be like a K on the res? Like if the res says like we have to affirm something, but rather like by affirming something you're making it like the majoritarian perspective?
I mean, you can say that, sure, as like a super pre-fiat argument. I think normally the argument might be like, it's just not read that often insofar as like debate is already a structured agonistic space where we're able to like affirm and negate it, so that already preserves. So like truth testing, like agonism is sometimes used to justify truth testing because it's like a space where we can disagree.
Okay.
I mean, really quickly, just to get to the end of it. So this person is your adversary. And say this is you, right? And this is your adversary. Because you're disagreeing, for example. You're in the agonistic space and you're like, I like cats better. No, I like dogs better, right? The enemy is the person who denies the ability for open contestation in the first place. Who denies the ability to have disagreement at all, right? So, for example, the adversary would become an enemy if they were like, you like cats, I'm going to punch you in the face now. Because that shuts down the agonistic space.
That shuts down the disagreement.
Yes.
So agonism, the agonistic person is bad.
No.
No,
So,
the
agonism is
an
good.
adversary, right?
Yeah.
But like an enemy would be someone who's like, LOL, if you don't affirm right now, I'm going to punch you in the face. Because
Yeah, or for example, the argument could be like, LOL, you affirmed the resolution, we should just like drop you right now. Instead of allowing for like, for example, that could be the reason why rolls of the narrow roll of the ballots might be bad. Right? Do you question?
Oh, you said that the white male always wins out in like the agonistic space, but if the agonistic space is like a space of like disagreement.
Yeah, I think the argument there would be like the white male would not, like that would be like an empirical claim, for example. But the idea is the only reason why one group would consistently win out in an agonistic space would be if there's enemy action going on, right? Like there's like it sounds like spy-ish, but if there's like an enemy who's doing things to like give one person an advantage in the agonistic space.
So that would be like a rejection by the agonistic space, like they wouldn't allow that.
Yeah, I mean like we don't really know. The agonistic space isn't like self-governing necessarily. It's more just like it would be unethical under the framework.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. It's 11. If you guys want to stick around and ask questions, actually first, can everyone come up and
Really
put
cool.
in
Yeah. Oh, emails.
emails, but like use the emails that you use for Dropbox.
Oh, okay.